You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 105.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, violinist, teacher, and high-performance coach, Dr. Renée-Paule Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing great. Today is a special episode. I'm bringing you a conversation I had with Dr. Kimberly Hankins on her podcast, The Aligned Musician. Kimberly is a trauma-informed yoga teacher and breathwork facilitator, helping musicians find freedom while performing through movement, meditation, and breathwork. As a musician's wellness content creator, she works to remove the stigma associated with playing-related injuries, chronic pain, and mental health-related issues. You might remember Kimberly from episode 87 of the Mind Over Finger podcast, where we discuss the power of mindfulness and breathwork in musical practice, performance, and our lives as musicians. And I wanted to share this conversation we had on her show because we had such a great time covering a wide array of other topics, including practicing mindfully, self-compassion in practice and performance, and performance anxiety. Also, I love Kimberly and her work, and I'm just happy to have more opportunities to bring awareness to everything she does with the Aligned Musician here on the Mind Over Finger platform. And before we dive into today's episode, I'm really excited to tell you about Practicing for Peak Performance, my brand new workshop coming up August 13, 14, and 15. This is the workshop for musicians who want to release the shackles of old practice hangups and find the flow that powers new peaks of performance. Together, we're going to cover the mindsets and practice systems that will have you go from uncertain and feeling unprepared to confident and ready for optimal performance. I can't wait. I'm packing in so much great and useful information for you. You can find all the details for practicing for peak performance at mindoverfinger.com. We're taught from the start to simply put in more hours in the practice room if we want to see success. But you've heard me say this many times, and you already know in your heart that repeating the same tired techniques over and over and getting hung up in the same mindless routines is getting you nowhere and leaving you ever more frustrated and disheartened, as all your hard work feels like sometimes a total waste of effort. I get it, believe me. And that's why I want to invite you to join me in this brand new 3-day workshop where I'm going to share my proven deep practice model for super powerful mindful practice, fast track progress, and rock solid performance, even under pressure. I can't wait, and I really hope to see you there. Again, the info is at mindoverfinger.com, and I'll have this link for you in the show notes. So without further ado, here's today's conversation. A big thanks to Kimberly for sharing this episode from The Aligned Musician, and I hope you enjoy this chat. Let's go to the show.
Welcome to the Aligned Musician podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly Hankins, and I'm a violist as well as a yoga and breathwork facilitator. I created this podcast to empower musicians like you to find your own path towards healing and normalize conversations around musicians' wellness. I'm so grateful for your support, and thank you for joining me. Dr. Renée-Paule Gauthier is a sought-after performer, teacher, high-performance coach whose career has taken her across the United States and Canada as a soloist, recitalist, chamber musician, orchestral leader, and clinician. Dr. Gauthier is passionate about helping musicians unleash their performance potential In addition to offering peak performance coaching, she gives lectures about practice and performance preparation to schools and organizations, and she hosts the popular Mind Over Finger podcast. The podcast offers discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, building a purposeful career. She joined the Chicago Lyric Opera Orchestra for the 2018 and 19, 2019-20 seasons. And she's performed with some of Chicago's finest ensembles. She's a string area coordinator, co-director of the chamber music program, and violin instructor at North Park University. She presents masterclasses and clinics on the topics of mindful, efficient practice, audition preparation, anxiety management, and peak performance to audiences across the world. Just wow, you've done so much. And a few months ago, I think it was, I was a guest on your podcast, and I'm just so excited to have you here today.
Happy to be here. So fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know you just reached 100 episodes on your podcast. So congratulations.
I know it's so exciting. When I started the podcast, I thought, we'll see how long this keeps going. And here we go, 100, the first 100.
What inspired you to start your podcast?
I think you'll probably resonate with this too, is that there is already so much fantastic content out there. There are so many great podcasts, and there are so many opportunities for everyone and so many different ways to approach topics. And for me, I always had lingering questions in my head whenever I would hear someone being interviewed on a podcast. And because my particular area of interest is really mindful practice, how do we practice more efficiently? How do we perform with more ease, more effortlessness? But also, how do we enjoy the whole process without the grind? How do we reconnect with the why? Why are we playing music? At times, as a professional musician, it can get really heavy, stressful, and, competitive. And for me, there was a real yearning to go back to the reason why I became a musician, why I loved it so much in youth orchestra, that I was like, this is awesome. And this is what I want to do. And I keep thinking that there's no reason why professional life shouldn't feel this way also. So, I just always had these questions in my head. And then one day I was driving back from the Iowa conference of music educators. I had just spoken about my research about the deep practice model. And I just was listening to a podcast and had more questions in my head. And the idea popped in my head, like, maybe I should have my own podcast. And then right away I was like, no, like, who does that? And it just kept nagging and nagging until finally I just hopped on YouTube and was like, not YouTube, Google. And I was like, hey, let's just look into it. And I got in touch with my good friend, Jason Heath, and asked him, you have a pretty awesome podcast. What does it entail? And he was super helpful in getting me started. And here we go.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. And I resonate so much with what you said about mindfulness when practicing and, just finding a way to play with more ease, not just physically, but mentally, and to not let the stress of an orchestral environment. I'm sure you're super familiar with that. And how we can, I think orchestral musicians especially, we can get so jaded and so just like, sick of playing the same pieces over and over and over again. And so finding a way to just make it new and exciting and fun every single time for ourselves is so important. And I love your philosophy for practicing. I think so many of us go into autopilot. We set our timer for however long we intend to practice, and then we're only focused on the amount of time rather than the quality of it or the experience of it. And so do you want to just share a little bit about that and maybe how we as musicians can find ways to make our practice time more present?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the backstory I tell all the time. So if people have been following me, they've heard that many times. I'm so sorry. But my parents were musicians. So as a kid, I didn't practice. I had coachings every day because my mom would practice with me. So my practice was very mindful, very guided, very specific. We would target specific goals all the time. None of it was mindless. And then when I got to college, as any college student, there were times where I would just go in the practice room and clock in and just play. And I realized that when I was on hard deadlines, I was practicing differently, and that I became very efficient with my time, and I was getting a lot of results quickly. So I used that a lot. And, I went to one thing for me was at New World Symphony, I got to work with Don Green. That was very influential for me. I discovered yoga, I discovered meditation, and all of these things. I mean, right, we are the result of our entire environment, of all the books that we read, of all the people that we meet. So all of these things, my yoga practice, my mindfulness practice, all of this started to merge with my musical practice. And when I started teaching at the college level, I realized how my students desperately needed help learning how to practice better. And how do you teach that? Because the problem is you have 1 hour a week or more if you want to give some of your time, which I'm always eager to do, but I'm also busy and I have a family. So you can't just start to give 5-hour lessons to everyone. And then you're always caught between this situation where, do I teach you how to shift properly, or do we talk about mindful practice? And there's always this choice, and there's never enough time to do everything. And this coincided at a time where I was finishing my doctoral studies and doing a lot of research. So I developed an approach that I call the deep practice model. And then now there's a whole array of things that I'm combining into what I call the mind over finger system, peak performance system. And, there is certain elements that when we start to incorporate them in our practice, that make us have more results. So in a nutshell, it's a mix of deliberate practice techniques, and we can use all of the wonderful methods that Anders Ericsson elaborated. A lot of people have read that study, and a lot of people have read those books that are behind me, Talent's Overrated, The Talent Code, all of that, that talk a lot about Ericsson's work and his methods. So, and then there's other methods, practicing techniques have been around for hundreds of years. And you combine that with the right mindsets, the right attitude, presence, how to problem solve. Self-compassion is a big one. I work so much on self-compassion with my students and my coaching clients, because self-compassion is not self-indulgence at all. Self-compassion is self-respect, self-alignment, excellence rooted in self-alignment. That's what self-compassion is. And when you combine those elements together and have a very mindful approach, then practicing becomes more efficient, performing becomes more effortless, or you can reach a place of feeling freer. And also the whole experience itself, because mastery is about the journey. So practicing in itself is not just to get to the result. Isn't it a wonderful exploration? We have these instruments in our hands, and we're having fun, and we're producing sounds, and we're finding things out about technique, about ourselves. It's just when we become so enthralled in the process itself, then everything is more rewarding, and then results start to pile on.
I love that, honoring the journey and enjoying it, enjoying the process of it. And I know I've read some self-help books and like some studies on like the science behind how we learn. And I find that so interesting in everything you said, like the idea that we can only become what we believe we can become. Like if we can't believe that we're possible of achieving these things, and we have this negative inner dialogue, it becomes almost impossible to achieve the things that we want. And so I think so much of it is like finding this sense of self-compassion, believing in ourselves, like giving ourselves maybe even some affirmations about it, and approaching the practicing not as something that like I have to do for hours and hours at a time, but really seeing it as a puzzle, seeing it as something that is a problem solving process. And I just think that's so amazing. And you mentioned a few books. Like if we want to dive deeper into this kind of area of self-compassion, is there a book or maybe a couple books you would recommend?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, anything that Kristen Neff wrote.
Mm.
She is a researcher who worked with Brene Brown. So, a lot of what Brene Brown talks about ends up being things that came out from the research she did with Kristen Neff, is really great. And any kind of venture in the Buddhist philosophy or meditation, all of those principles. I mean, bare awareness, beginner's minds are principles I use heavily in my coaching and within the deep practice model itself. So, all of those things, wherever you get your principles about self-compassion is going to lead you to the right place. And one thing that I hear a lot from people, there's this hesitation of trying things because they want to do it the right way. So one thing I keep saying all the time is you can't mess it up. Just try something. We have so much inner wisdom that we can tap into if we give ourselves the permission to do it and to reflect on things. So I think that at times self-compassion can also come from a place of self-trust and trusting that we can figure it out. And you just mentioned learning, this great book about learning called How We Learn by Benedict Cary. Very interesting. And there's, so many. I have what you guys don't see. So there's this bookshelf behind me, but there's another one there that's full of books. So there's many I could recommend. Any of these things, Don Green's books are fantastic, of course. My favorite is Performance Success. I love the inner game of golf, even more than the inner game of tennis.
Oh, interesting.
And Kenny Werner's Effortless Mastery is also very great. Barry Green, Inner Game of Music. Or so many.
Also your dissertation, The Mind First and Foremost.
Yeah, that should be a book soon, hopefully.
Oh, hopefully. I'm excited for that. That's amazing.
Yeah. I had a conversation. Oh, I don't see it. It was on my desk all week. Forget the title. I had an episode on the Mind Over Finger podcast with Amy Baltzell, and her books are incredible. I strongly recommend Amy Baltzell.
I'm writing all of these down to add to my list. Thank you so much for that. So you're an incredible violinist, and you've done so much work as an orchestral musician, as a concert master. And did you always find the violin to be something easy for you, or did you come up against any challenges, like in terms of the mindfulness or self-compassion part that you talk about, or maybe in other ways?
100% yes to all of these questions. Resistance, obstacle, right? I think that I am really walking my journey through all of the things that I teach, because books are great, but there's nothing that replaces having lived it. So when I talk about, I have a group coaching program, and I talk about all of these things. It's called the Music Mastery Experience, and it's so fun. And I hope that everyone who's listening joins. We start June 1st, and there's still some spots available. And we talk about all of these things, mindful practice, and all of the aspects of performance preparation. But for me, I've done countless performances in my life, and I've learned from each of them. I've done a lot of auditions. I've performed in all sorts of circumstances. I've done many competitions. And, just to think back, I'm thinking, like, how did I go through all of this? I don't even know. But that's one thing I want to tell everyone who's playing music right now, professional, amateurs. teachers, students. It's that whatever the other people's experience is, you have to live your own journey, and it's not going to be easy. There's going to be obstacles because we are facing our own demons is a strong word, but I'm going to use it because at times I really felt like I was having a battle in the practice room with some super mean Renee, you know. Um, I talk so much about self-compassion now because I had so little. And I think that we are trained to go in the practice room and get the work done. So when I talk about the grind, I've lived it. I've done the grind, and I would walk in there and practice and be like, this is what it takes to win this audition. And then I realized now that it doesn't have to be this way. There's a way to find joy in the process and get all of these results from a place of self-compassion and self-respect, you know, and to really enjoy that process. But the resistance, the strong emotions, the negative feelings, they're actually not necessarily to be avoided, but they could be noted, acknowledged, even maybe welcomed, because we're allowed to feel of all of our feelings and be like, I feel very angry right now. Let's look at that. So instead of, just seeping into that, I don't even know if that's a word in English, but, instead of sitting in this anger and just grinding through it, just pause for a second and why am I angry? Like something's making me upset in this practice session. How can I reset that? Like, let's observe this anger, this frustration, this feeling of not getting anything done, and tune into it, figure out where it comes from. And there's so many ways to change that. So I face, I'm not immune to this negative talk every day, but now I have more tools to overcome it. So I would say I have faced all of the obstacles. I continue to face all of them, but now I know how to work around it. So anyone who's on that journey to mastering a musical instrument, whether you're a professional or a music lover, a student, there are going to be obstacles. There are going to be moments where it's not easy to practice. And it's about the self-growth. It's about what we learn about ourselves through the process, what we, the skills that we develop. It's hard to develop skills on an instrument. One thing I hear a lot is it should feel easier. And my question to this is, should it? Why should it feel easy to learn to play the violin? It's not easy, but does it have to feel awful? I don't think so. There's a way around it, but we also have to accept that it's a process and we can't skip steps. So how can we approach this with so much curiosity, so much patience and self-love and self-acceptance? And, beginner's mind is all about curiosity and enthusiasm. So any obstacle, how can you approach it with curiosity and be like, all right, things are getting hard. What am I going to learn? I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I'm just thinking of like, in my own musical experience, it's hard to find musical experts in our field that are modeling that kind of behavior. And I know that you kind of brought up like having some obstacles or some negative experience with like teachers and fellow students, and like, do you want to talk more on that, or maybe how do we meet the obstacles that are outside of us and not take that as an internal judgment of our self-worth, or how far we're moving forward in our own practice journey?
Absolutely. See a comment here. It's a long journey. I mean, I just want to talk about coaching here for a second, because several years ago I started getting coached, and it was a huge revelation for me what coaching does to my life. And now I'm a coach. I'm actually also getting certified to be a life coach because I feel like the ability for me to explore my thinking process is changing me so much. And I use these tools with my clients, and I just want to be the most qualified at it. So I, in addition to have the skills to coach from an artistic point of view, I find that so much of the work I do with my clients in our coaching context is life coaching. And so let's go back to trauma. I think that all of us, to a certain degree, have experienced, and I mean, trauma is a big word, and it can mean a lot of things to many people. And unfortunately, I was trying to find another word than trauma, because people who have experienced, not that I want to categorize trauma, but there are some people who have suffered tremendously out there and are really traumatized by something, and then there's some people who have, bad experiences with performances. So it's hard to find a word that can encompass everyone. So I treat this word with a lot of respect and a lot of care. I'm very careful when I talk about this, because it is such a big scale of trauma.
Well, and I think, there's trauma with a big T and there's trauma with a little t.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, as somebody that has gone through some trauma-informed trainings, I just want to say too that like trauma isn't about the experience of what happened so much as it is the way that it's affected the nervous system. Because some people are well regulated, they have support systems, they have access to resources, and they might be faced with something that's like a big T trauma, but walk away from it feeling fine, like it's not affected them in a deep, profound way somatically.
Yeah.
And then there's people that may not have experienced that big T trauma, but don't have the tools or resources to self-regulate their nervous system. And something like long-term stress actually affects the nervous system in a similar way we're seeing than people that have experienced some of these major life events. And so, I mean, I think it's okay. I think it's okay though that we use this word trauma from the sense that like we're not talking about the event of what happened or what occurred, but that we're talking about the way that someone's nervous system has been affected and how we're able to move past stressful events in a way that we feel empowered and doesn't affect our mind and our body. So I actually appreciate your use of the word and also your just compassion around that word too, and the way that you're using it. So
that's very eloquently put. Thank you so much for clarifying it much better than I did. But yes, it's exactly what you described, is that for some people, an event is very triggering and it just stays with you. So this is work that we do, is how do we, get back to this place of self-alignment that I've mentioned many times. And, another word that is very loaded is worthiness. Inherently, we're all worthy. We will not be more worthy tomorrow than we are today, and we're not more worthy today than we were yesterday. We just are all worthy, but not all of us know that about ourselves. And so is how can we go back to seeing our own self-worth, finding our footing with our emotions and our thoughts, and then maybe look at some of the past events, see how we can get some leverage over them, try to understand the thinking that affected the emotions and what you were saying and how it affects the nervous system. And then there's so many ways to slowly get us comfortable. So for example, if you've had a teacher who was so negative and so triggering and caused deeply embedded trauma in terms of not feeling like you can perform, there are ways that you can gently recondition yourself to perform, starting with very safe contexts, friends, loving friends, and then gently as you build your confidence, expand that to, I'm not saying that everyone has to perform, but for the people who want to and have to overcome all of these like huge walls in front of them, there are ways to gently build a ramp up the wall. So it's a beautiful, long, at times difficult, but worthy process.
Oh, I love that. And I love your framing of worthiness and that performance, that it's a ramp up. And I think in a lot of musical settings, we are expected, from the very first week of our academic music school life to start playing for our peers. And oftentimes that can be the most challenging audience. That's so much more challenging than playing for a random group of people who may not be professional musicians or even know what piece we're playing. But to play for people that we may feel that we are in competition with, that they know the music better than we do sometimes, that can be so challenging to just dive right into that.
Yes. Isn't it interesting what like the thoughts do to us? Because there could be, I'm sure you've experienced this, you're practicing in the practice room and you're feeling it like you're having such a great time. And there could be 15 people in the corridor, including the one that intimidates you the most. If you're a violinist and maybe Hillary Hahn is standing outside the door, that might be a little bit intimidating unless you don't know about it. If you don't know about it, you're just doing your own thing. But as the second you have this thought, oh my gosh, she's standing right there. And all of a sudden, your entire self shift. It's a different perspective. And all of a sudden, you know, things start to happen. And that's just with one thought. It's very interesting.
That's so interesting. I want to get to just a couple of these questions because I think they're on the same wavelength. One of the questions was, how do you think we can fight inner negative self-dialogue, and would that be healthy? And someone else asks, how can we get over I'm not good enough, or it's not good until it's perfect thoughts? I think those two are kind of very, very closely related.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, many thoughts. I'm going to try to scroll down. What would that be healthy? Okay. So I think better when I can see things. One of the things that I find the most powerful about negative self-talk is noticing that it's happening. And in the music mastery experience, we have a whole training about that, how to address negative self-talk. But like the biggest part of it, I'll just give it for free here, is when you notice that it's happening, already you're separating yourself from it. So it's already losing some of its power on you because you're noticing it's very meta. You're noticing your thinking, And I think that some techniques that you can start to use is if you notice that it's happening, can you extract the language, the words, maybe write them down? And you don't even have to change that yet. Just look at it. And just looking at it might get you to pause and think, wow, those are not very nice words to use with a human being, I mean, I don't know about your kind of self language, but mine was not language I would use in front of my children, And you start to look at this language, that's a completely different set of other topic is when do I use it? And then, but if we just address this language there, can you start to find kinder alternatives to these words? There's also the concept of understanding that when we use this kind of language with ourselves, we're creating an inner battle. We are attacking ourselves. And what happens when we are attacked as human beings, as people talk about the lizard brain or whatever, while we go into flight or fight. And we definitely, I think, tend to fight. Or we can flight too. But either way, the negative self-talk is using a lot of RAM in your brain while you're trying to practice. That's not helpful. So by just knowing that, because at times we feel like, well, I just got to do it. I'm going to hustle. I'm going to make it. And to make it, you have to coax yourself, and this is the way. All of us, I mean, maybe not pianists, but if pianists play in orchestra too, or if they've been yelled at by someone, but as an orchestra, I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience before. I definitely had, where you get like my husband calls it the furry eyebrows from the conductor. And it just kind of all of a sudden you can't do anything. So if you get, I remember youth orchestra, Otto Werner Müller, the conductor at Curtis. He was a scary man. If he looked at me with those eyes, I know as a 12-year-old, I couldn't do anything. And so, but you're being that person to yourself in the practice room. You're totally incapacitating yourself. And I hope I said that word correctly. So once you start to see that fact that this is not helpful, and you can understand that what is helpful is being completely objective, assessing what is, rather than judging yourself, choosing the language that you would use on a student, a dear friend, maybe your own child, someone that you care deeply about and you really want them to do well in life. There is a way that you would encourage them. You would be that kind of coach. That's how you want to talk to yourself. So there's a certain intellectual understanding that we can use in terms of, well, even on paper, this is not helpful, this negative language. So I should just stop it. And then there's the more emotional aspect, starting to notice, what kind of words do I use? One thing I do with some of my clients is we name the negative voice. So we have Bertha, for example. And then it's just noticing when Bertha is in the room and okay. So, and I think that they use that kind of analogy also in the inner game of tennis. Even Elizabeth Gilbert in her book, Big Magic, which I really like this book a lot, talks about fear and how, she sees that fear has a value in her life and how fear is going to be there and she's not going to hate fear. But fear, she talks about being in the car on the road trip with fear, and she writes a love letter to fear and be like, you can come along on the ride, but you cannot drive. You can't, access the radio station, so, so I think that, sorry, it's a really long answer to your question, but there's that intellectual understanding that this is not helpful. And then there's looking into what we're doing so that we can start to modify the language that we're using, the tone that we're using. Also noticing physically how we feel when we're using this language. And we can use our body state to change that. So a breathing exercise is really great. A moment of mindfulness, of releasing tension. I think that when we release bodily tension, we also release the anger in our words. So those are some ways to do that.
Oh, that's so great. And it's so similar to, I just remember when I was going through this journey with myself, I had a lot of negative self-dialogue a few years ago, and I took a break from practicing, and I was like, it's amazing how much inner self-dialogue you don't realize is there until you start writing it down. Something I want to say too. But for me, I was like, I thought of my negative self-talk as like my practice goblin. It's like something that would just be there, like saying the absolute worst things about me, and allowing myself to distance myself from those thoughts. Just acknowledging that, like, and I'm sure you know this from your time with yoga and meditation, but like, I am not my thoughts, that my thoughts are something separate from me as a human. And I felt like that was the most empowering realization to have. But I also wanted to touch on something else you said about, oh my gosh, I can't remember. I can't remember right now. But yes, like the negative self-talk is something I caught it. The negative self-talk is something that actually has, it can tell us information about ourselves, about what is weighing on us and how we're feeling in our bodies. But I feel like for me, my negative self-talk around practicing started because I think I felt like I had to motivate myself in a certain way in order to create urgency around practicing or getting things done. And so, like, for me, it was the messages of like, I'm not enough. I'm always out of tune. I have to do this. I have to practice more. I have to practice harder. And then it's really hard to even if you're telling yourself in a positive way, like, you're not there yet, you have to keep going. That can still very quickly turn into, I'm not enough, you know?
And what's funny is what we use to motivate ourselves is what makes us not want to practice. I mean, sometimes I look at the case, it's closed right now, and just looking at it, I mean, I bypass all of the thinking. It right away goes to the dread of, oh, ugh, what self limitation am I going to have to face in the practice room today? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
when we use this harsh language, it just creates a domino effect where it comes to the point of us not even want to practice at all. So it's kind of a vicious circle that it can be very beneficial if we break it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just finding ways to like feel good about practicing that don't have to be that don't have to be centered around this like urgency to get better or urgency to be perfect right now. Because I think for many of us, it's like with weekly lessons, I think with that structure, especially, like I know some weeks for me, I'm in a good headspace. I got lots of free time to just kind of practice, explore things, and I show up to my lesson feeling great. And then there's other weeks where life happens and maybe I don't have as much time to practice, and it can just feel like on a weekly basis, we're trained that there's a certain expectation of how much we're supposed to improve.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that we shoot ourselves in the foot with that because I hear that so much all the time from clients, and I was guilty of that as well. Is we feel like we have to practice something once and we should expect it to be solved. And the learning process does not work like that. What happens is we learn something. If we are able to play it great in the first session, it means that this was 100% within the realm of our current skills. Great, be happy. But if you practice something and it felt great, you have this illusion of acquired skill because it's very fresh in your short-term memory, but it has not yet been assimilated at the long-term memory level or at I know it's not muscle memory, but we'll just talk about muscle memory because everybody knows what that means. It's not yet assimilated at the muscle memory level. So people show up in the practice room the next day and they feel like, oh, it was there yesterday and now it's here. And they start defeated. They start feeling defeated. And what kind of work do we do when we feel defeated? Not amazing work. So, what I would propose is for people to celebrate when they feel like they pick a passage that they practiced the day before and felt amazing, and they feel like they are back, 50% or more. Celebrate that. That's the learning process. Because what you need to do is learn it, relearn it, maybe relearn it a third time. And then every single time that you relearn it, you're building all these neural pathways, that myelination process that everyone is talking about. That's what's happening. You're building the skill. It's normal. It's what it should happen. You should forget. Forgetting is amazing because that's what allows you to really deeply embed those skills, that knowledge, those notes that you want to memorize. When you have to relearn them, you're doing it right. So don't be upset if you feel like you come back and you've lost half of your skills. That's it. It's what it should be. So if you can do it perfectly the next day, you were already there. If it's not, you can feel amazing knowing that you're building fresh new skills, and that if you keep showing up and relearning it and, you know, reinforcing it and anchoring it, you know, start judging a year later if you still can't play that passage, but give yourself a little time. So if you forget, celebrate it. You're doing it right.
Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Oh, I don't know. There's too many to choose from. I mean, I would love to have anyone who's maybe curious about the music master experience to maybe check out the website and check the page and see if this is something that could be interested for them. And then if it is, they could book a call and we could chat and see. But you know, there's so many beautiful topics. Lots of them on the Mind Over Finger podcast, of course, including your episode, which is so great. And hold on, I see a question here.
Oh, sure.
How can we get over I'm not good enough, or it's not good unless it's perfect? Thoughts. Wait, is that the one you told me earlier?
Yeah, I think we covered that one a little bit earlier. But if there's anything else you'd like to say on that, or
you know, I'm not good enough is a hard one. And we can try. Okay, here's one thing I'd like to offer. Transition words can be very helpful. It's important to believe what we're trying. You know, if there's a deeply embedded belief, you can't go from I will never be good enough to I will be amazing. You know, you can repeat that in front of a mirror all day. If you don't believe it, it's not going to work. So positive affirmations only work if you believe it. So then what would you believe? So what's the word here? It's not good enough. It needs to be perfect. You know, it's possible that one day I would feel that I'm good enough. That's something that you could believe. It's possible that one day I'll play this piece. It's possible that one day, you know, so to just kind of find a phrase that offers some flexibility that you could believe and work towards that. Because it's so wonderful when you start to contemplate, is it possible one day I could be enough? Yeah, that's possible. Oh, okay. Well, let's stay with that for a little bit and then, you know, gently work your way up the scale of affirmations, you know. But good enough, I don't know. It's a journey. It's growth. It's not there's no destination, I think.
And how can we find you?
Everything is at mindoverfinger.com, you know, or Instagram, Facebook, Mind Over Finger.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit subscribe, give us a rating, and follow on Instagram at The Aligned Musician. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Kimberly Hankins from the Aligned Musician podcast. You can find the show on your favorite podcasting platform or at thealignedmusician.com, where you will also find all the information about Kimberly and the wonderful resources she has for you. Kimberly and I would love to know what your favorite takeaways from today's conversation were, so get in touch with us. I'm Mind Over Finger on both Instagram and Facebook, and she's the Aligned Musician. Don't forget to visit mindoverfinger.com for all the details on practicing for peak performance, my brand new 3-day workshop where I will share with you all the tools to reach new peaks of performance. That's what I have for you guys today. Happy practicing and à bientôt.